It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Hey everybody, this is Tony Richards, and I want to welcome you back again to our Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. We're talking about personalities, territories, towns, and buildings, and today we're really going to get into a personality and a territory. We're going to be talking about Plowboy Stan Frazier, and his primary territory was Tennessee. And to help, we've got Kurt Nielsen coming by today, who's written a biography on Plowboy Stan Frazier. And we've got our premier Tennessee analyst and historian, Tim Deals, who's going to be coming by. And we're going to be talking about the summer in Tennessee in 1975. In our show, we're talking about primarily 50 years ago in 1975. And it was a very pivotal year, and we're coming up to some very pivotal events toward the end of 75 that are going to shape the evolution of pro wrestling coming forward in the years ahead. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my X feed. Come on by and follow me on X. That's used to be Twitter. My X handle, I guess you would call it, is at Tony Richards 4. And we have a great community. Our community is spread out among Facebook and Twitter and Substack. And we've got people who are in various parts of that. Some people are in all of them, but it's funny. My Twitter community of the Time Tunnel is markedly different than the Facebook community. And that's different than the Substack community. We just have a different mindset and different flavor in each one of those. But you can follow me on X at Tony Richards 4. Our Facebook community is called the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, and you can get the Substack channel at Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. And there I'm publishing all my research. As a matter of fact, this past weekend, I published some research that it isn't, and I had a conversation with a lot of the authors and historians in Waterloo here a couple of weeks ago at the Tragos Thez Hall of Fame. And we research so many things, and then we don't have room in the books to put all the research in the books. So what do we do with that, right? And so I was telling them about what I'm doing is I'm publishing my research on Substack, because I want people to be able to access it and to read it and to have it, right? And so out of my Dory Funk Senior book, there's a guy that worked there as a heel in the 50s and as one of the primary heel managers in the 60s, Leo the Lion Newman. And he was from Missouri. He was from a small town in Missouri called Kimmswick. And Kimmswick is on the Mississippi River on the Missouri border. And Leo was an interesting character. And so you will get to read stuff like that on my Substack channel. A lot of my research that may not make it into the podcast, it may not make it into a book, but we want to make sure that we get it out there. So we publish it in the Daily Chronicle and some of the other series that I'm publishing and writing in Substack. So it's at Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. I hope you'll come by, become a subscriber. And if you want to become a paid subscriber, I would really appreciate that too. It's only $5 a month. And if you want to save $10 a year, it's $50 a year. And that helps support my pro wrestling research even more, because the time it takes, the trips you make, the resources you have to procure, it's kind of expensive sometimes to do all that. And when you put your subscriptions in at $5 a month, it really helps out, because all of that money goes directly. I don't use it to buy my groceries. I don't use it to pay my bills. I put it all back into my pro wrestling history research. Every dollar you put in as a subscriber goes right back in to my research efforts. So just know that, and thank you for doing that. So let's get to this interview. Kurt Nielsen has written this book. It's going to be available at the Cauliflower Alley reunion coming up here in Las Vegas. And Kurt is sending a copy to me in the mail, and I'm looking forward to getting that. And in the interview, I mentioned a story about my grandfather's feed store that particularly pertains to Roy and Herb Welch, and also to Plowboy Frazier. And Kurt was kind enough to include that story in this interview in his book. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. So let's go to that interview now. Here in the Richards Ranch, we are talking to Kurt Nielsen, author of the new biography on Stan Plowboy Frazier. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. This is Tony Richards. We talk pro wrestling history here, and today we are going to talk about a really interesting fella in pro wrestling history. As a matter of fact, he's a wrestler I grew up watching as a kid in Kentucky, and my guest today is going to be, or is in the process of writing, a biography about him. My guest is Kurt Nielsen, and the subject of the biography is Plowboy Stan Frazier. So I can't wait to get into this today. Kurt, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Man, I'm so glad that you're here. Now, Kurt lives in Southern California and originally grew up in Northern California. So I got to ask you, how did you get interested in a guy from Philadelphia, Mississippi?
Well, I'm lucky because my father was an old-time wrestling fan. He used to watch stuff in the 40s and 50s, and he was really into the history, really into the backstory. And when we first saw Uncle Elmer, my dad kind of gave me insight on things, and so he really bolstered my interest in the history. And wrestling to me was always more than what you saw on the surface. Now, I saw Plowboy Frazier, or Uncle Elmer, or whatever you want to call him, as this charismatic giant. Couldn't do too much in the ring, but there was more to the guy, and I was so intrigued by him, and I wanted to dig deeper. And by the time he was Uncle Elmer, he'd been in the business about 25 years, and who would have known if you're just a kid watching it? So that's kind of started it right then and there, and.
So when did you see him when he was out in California in that original run early in his career, or did your dad tell you about him?
That's something that I learned from my father. The only time that he was out here on the West Coast, I think 79, he was in Los Angeles for a very brief run. He was up in the Pacific Northwest in the early 70s. But independent of that, it was his Uncle Elmer run. Yeah. And that was 85. He did a few house shows, and then of course he was at WrestleMania 2 against Adrian Adonis, and that was 86.
What years did Stan break into the business?
1959.
Wow.
1959, yeah. When he retired, he was in the business for 33 years, and for a giant, really, Giant Baba is the longest running of the giants, but Frazier is really right behind him.
I would have missed that trivia question.
Yeah. No, he started very, very early. Of course, Stan was from the Gulf Coast area, and a guy who looked like him, a guy who was built like him, he really wasn't designed for a normal life. And with the stars of the Gulf Coast being big names out there, I mean, they were these celebrities. That's the life that he wanted, and he went out and fought for it and got it. But it took him a while.
Do you know who broke him into the business?
Well, it was a guy named Duke Scarborough, and he was a referee. He was out of Meridian, Mississippi, and he was just sort of like they would use him from time to time, but mostly a referee. But he was never a big star, but he was the guy who broke him in. Stan tried before. He got a a tryout with Buddy Fuller, and he got stretched pretty bad. And
Well, they were known for that in Tennessee.
yes, they were.
The Welches, they made you quit. You know, try to make you quit when you wanted to get into the business, and so those guys that made it, like a David Schultz or whatever. I mean, they were tough dudes.
You had to want it really badly, and just because you were large, it didn't mean they were going to just start using you. There were some guys like Happy Humphrey or Max Palmer, who was another giant. They were just, they were strictly gimmicks. You would only get maybe a year or two out of them at the most, and their matches weren't any good. But Stan wanted a career out of this. He didn't want just a 1 or 2 year run, and so he was viewed more as a wrestler, not a gimmick. But of course, in the end, he really was a gimmick.
Everybody's kind of a gimmick in wrestling, but
Of
there were several that sort of had that role. You had the Scuffling Hillbillies, you
Yeah,
had the Kentuckians. Of course, I
that's
guess
right.
the most famous was Haystacks Calhoun,
Yeah,
and then there was a Jack Pfeffer knockoff called Haystacks Muldoon, and
yep. Haystacks Muldoon. Yep.
and so Stan, he did he come in as the convict, or was that something else he did in the process?
That came much later on. I mean, that was 1968, starting in Los Angeles. 68 until well, maybe summer of 1970. That was the extent of the convict's life, and yet it was such a big run for him that it sort of eclipsed anything that he did prior. He became a big star, got a lot of magazine coverage, and of course in Japan, he really became kind of iconic. He was in comic books. He had his own doll. Long before other major stars ever had a doll, there was a convict doll, and he played his cards right, he could have had a long run with that in Japan, but he didn't change his style too much. He was still doing his big man, plowboy gimmick, and he
I,
wasn't playing up the heel too much.
I guess there was no way for him to know this at the time, but I think because it was such a limited run, and there's only the 1 or 2 photos of him floating out around there as the convict, but it's really the part of his career that most older historian type guys like you and me, it's the thing that people talk about the most. Maybe because it's so rare. I don't know.
Well, it's probably the closest he ever got to legitimacy in the business. He was a big draw as that character, and people have to remember that Andre the Giant was that he hit Japan in 1970. So Stan was one of the giants who was before him, and at the time, people had never seen a guy that large, and so he really made an impression just visually. In the ring, he did what he did. He did the big man spots, and he was a big, strong guy, but he never had a great deal of finesse. He wasn't the greatest athlete in the world, and I think that kind of hampered him as far as his growth. I also think he didn't want to push it too far because, why bother? If you could just walk into a room and people look at you and that makes an impression, well, stick with that.
I think the first time I saw him, now I've got very vivid memories of him once the '70s wore on. And
Hmm.
I've got a story that you wanted me to do for your book, and I'll tell it here too, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
But
of
but the
course.
first time I saw him, I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. It was in '72 or '73, and Phil Golden had an outlaw promotion in Paducah, based in
Hmm.
Paducah, named All Star Wrestling, and he was Tiny Frazier.
Yep.
And I saw him on television. I'm like, and as a 9 or 10 year old kid, I'm like, my God, look at the size of that guy. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
And the
Oh yeah.
funny thing to me as a kid was his name was Tiny, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, that was the nickname that he had going back to when he was a kid. And a lot of people in certain areas, like in the Mobile area, he was always known as Tiny Frazier, the Pascagoula Plowboy, but they know him as Tiny Frazier there. He was Tiny Frazier up in the Pacific Northwest as well. Yeah, sort of. I mean, that's it's like calling a bald man curly. It's the same kind of idea.
But then later on, my grandfather owned a Purina feed store, and that's kind of where I grew up. Was hanging around the feed store, and eventually working there as a teenager until I went off to school. But I was telling you when we talked before that I can still remember how well the people of my area in Western Kentucky they identified with Plowboy Frazier, and he was only in specific programs and angles, right? And I still remember guys sitting around the wood stove in the wintertime in the feed store. The farmers, they'd do whatever they had to do in the morning, then they'd come to the feed store and get coffee and sit around and talk. And they'd talk about whatever was on TV the night before, who shot JR, all of that stuff, But I still remember several occasions where they're like, well, I tell you one thing, they're in for it now. They got Plowboy Frazier coming in to take care of things, and
That's right. That's right.
And there's these guys sitting around the stove in my grandfather's store. They've also got bib overalls on. They also have the same kind of. They look like they could be the tag team partners with Plowboy, right? And
That's
so
right.
they just got into that character, I think, because he wasn't overdone, and then they'd bring him in as the troubleshooter against the heels, and these guys just loved it.
Well, he had a lot of things going for him. I mean, obviously, he was the big gun, like the ultimate answer, like bringing in Andre, or bringing in Abdullah the Butcher. He was one of those big scary dudes that you knew that somebody was in big trouble. But there was a relatability to him. His personality, he wasn't polished. He just kind of was who he was, and a lot of the fans throughout the South saw themselves in him, and that's one of the reasons why he became so successful. People almost forgave his lack of finesse in the ring because they said, well, they just liked him. Same thing with his long run in Memphis. I mean, Stan was mostly known for dropping the big leg, but he was so likable, so personable. People gave him a pass, just like they did with Jimmy Valiant. Jimmy Valiant became iconic out there in Memphis. He was one of the ongoing superstars like Tommy Rich or Bill Dundee, and his work was always pretty awful.
Well,
but they loved him.
Well, as far as these guys were concerned, the time for wrestling's long since passed. I mean, we're going to kick some butt now. Plowboy's coming. It's revenge time now. These guys are getting their comeuppance.
Oh yeah, and he was always destined to have a career of limited runs. He was a traveling attraction, and he knew it, and every promoter knew it. If Andre the Giant stayed in one territory for too long, the gimmick wore off, and he was no longer special. And so that's why Vince McMahon Sr. kept moving him around.
And you didn't want to beat him.
No.
You didn't want to beat him. You wanted to keep him special. Now,
Yes.
Kurt, was he able to, I mean, working with those limited runs in, let's say, 5 offices around the South? If he bounced back and forth between Nashville and maybe Paducah and Mobile and then down to Pensacola, or I mean, was he able to make a living doing that, or did he have to do something?
Oh yeah, he was. He would take pretty much any opportunity that he could, and he especially in Memphis, he was a big draw, an ongoing draw. He whenever he kind of faded out a little bit, he went to another territory and he would come back for a little, while longer. But, Memphis, he had that huge run with Jerry Lawler. Jerry Jarrett always says it was one of the biggest angles they ever did in Memphis. And that started in what, 1975, 1976.
Yep.
And basically he could stay there, off and on, until the end of his career. Didn't even have to work that hard, team up with a tag team partner who did all the work. You just tag him in, he throws a couple of punches, drops the leg. That's all the people wanted from him. But they loved him for who he was, and that sort of superseded anything that he had to do physically.
In Louisville, Kentucky, and that is one where you and Jerry Lawler, Plowboy, are going to be in there with hair against hair. There has got to be somebody's hair to go in the match in there. Is this the way you want it?
That's the way I want it. That's the way I asked for it, and that's the way it's booked. Jerry Lawler's going to look funny, run around Memphis, run around Louisville, run around everywhere, run that smart mouth with bald head. Well, he's going to be bald-headed, so he ain't going to cut my hair, but somebody's going to lose their hair that night. Right here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Well, the situation is, and I know Lawler is very proud of that curly locks of his up in there, and that would, I guess, give you a lot of satisfaction to be able to take it off from him.
That's right. Remember, Lance, when I used to be his partner, I had to walk around and carry his bag, his hair dryer, and his brush and all that stuff, and I had to dry his hair up in the dressing room. Well, people don't know about all that, but neighbor, Mr. Jerry Lawler, bring your scissors, bring your clippers, because you're going to need it.
He is sitting in a situation where he has put his hair up, and this is the first time I can ever remember Lawler putting his hair up, and he's doing against a guy that I just can't believe, the big Plowboy Frazier, a guy who has given him nothing but trouble since you parted with Jerry.
Well, everybody in Louisville seen he busted my head 2 weeks ago. Well, Mr. Jerry Lawler, you're going to get your head busted, plus you're going to get it shaved, too.
Well, you know for a fact that somebody's going to get it shaved.
Somebody's going to lose their hair, right.
Okay.
That's right, neighbor.
Plowboy Frazier says he's ready for it. He's going to put Jerry Lawler right in there in a bald category in there. Is Plowboy Frazier and Jerry Lawler going a hair against hair? Absolutely somebody must lose it in there. We'll see in Louisville.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Like when those guys would be sitting around the wood stove talking about him, they'd be calling each other neighbor, because that was his little crutch word, hey neighbor. Well, they'd all be like, well, it's over now, neighbor. Here comes Plowboy.
That was it. Well, he was like a lot of celebrities where they knew so many people. They just came up with a word, sort of a blanket, like Pearl Bailey used to call everybody honey, because she said, I can't remember names to save my life. So Stan Frazier would call everybody neighbor, but it's true. It's just, he was just who he was. There was almost no pretense about him. He was just a big, goofy, crazy character, and people got it. They loved it.
And I got to know Jerry Jarrett before he passed, and we visited several times, and I told him, I said, look, every now and then you guys would do something that really hack me off, and I'm like, you must have really run out of ideas or something like that. And then Jerry would kind of maybe indicate that might have been more Lawler than him. But when they did Kamala too, that kind of that kind of hacked me off. I'm like, what are you doing with Stan?
Well, and a lot of that was Lawler. Lawler was very tight with Stan. They were good friends, and Lawler's ideas were always more over the top than Jarrett's. He just wanted to see what he could do with Stan, and Stan had the sense of humor to pull that stuff off.
Yes. And
he was game for anything. I mean, as long as it could extend his employment,
well, sure.
He would do it. Yeah,
you got to do what you got to do. Now, on the other end, I laughed my butt off when he was the Lone Ranger.
Oh my gosh, it was so ridiculous.
Because I'm
Yeah,
like, as if nobody can tell who this is. He's got this hat and this little bitty mask on, but the
made for a
body and all
child.
the,
Yeah,
yeah, right. But but uh,
yeah,
but but
but
that
that
was
was
that was
that was
funny
it.
to me. That was funny to me.
Well, who's with us here? Jimmy Hart,
How many
Mad
times
Dog
am
the
I going to have to
Blues
sit back there and watch that Stagger Lee special? How much is it costing him?
We had a lot of requests for
well, a lot of requests. How many, too? Well, let me tell you. Well, I've got a request. Shove it somewhere. Let me tell you something, baby. You know what? Now, this is great. You know why this is great? Because, you see, Jimmy Hart, they try to do everything in the world that Jimmy Hart can be doing. They try to disqualify my men. I jump in the ring. We get $1,000 fines. Nothing's happened to them, okay? Now, we were in a match several months ago. Beautiful Bobby Eaton against Coco Ware. Right, Stagger Lee, or whoever you want to call him. What happens? We win the match. He's supposed to leave town for a year, and he doesn't leave town for a year. He comes back the next week as Stagger Lee. Now, I want you to sit here and tell me and the people that it's not Coco Ware under that mask. Is it? Oh, it's not. Oh, that's great. Great. Okay, but that's okay. That's okay, because if that's the way you want to play, that's beautiful. Because what does Jimmy Hart do? I don't get mad, baby. I get even. But I have found the man. That is definitely going to take care of Stagger Lee, Coco Ware, once and for all. And I want to bring him in right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Lone Ranger.
The Lone Ranger rides again.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, Frazier was suspended. He has been suspended.
I know he has. That's not Frazier. That's the Lone Ranger. Plowboy Frazier was fat, overweight, and out of shape. Look at this man, all muscle. This is the Lone Ranger. Right, baby? Look at him. Come on. Hey, and right, that's Stagger Lee, too, right? That's not Coco Ware, because, see, Coco Ware was short and dumpy, but after all, Stagger Lee's short and dumpy, right? But that's right. But look, this is the Lone Ranger, baby. Are you right, big man? And plus, listen, Frazier, remember Frazier had a deep voice. Listen to this man. I'm the Lone Ranger. That's right. See, I'll tell you, the Lone Ranger, baby, and we are ready. We're going to get the job done. But let me tell you something. Kemosabe, come here. You go back and water the horses, baby. We're going to be ready. See you later. I got other business to take care of.
Anything.
All right.
Lone Ranger.
The Lone Ranger.
How did he get booked with Vince?
The major thing, they were building up Hillbilly Jim. So Hillbilly Jim was Hulk Hogan's protege and his tag team partner, and he was going to be, top echelon babyface up there with Junkyard Dog, Tito Santana, and really right before WrestleMania, he had a really bad knee injury. Didn't even happen in the ring. He slipped on a wet spot on the floor. I think it was in the dressing room, and ripped his kneecap out of its socket. So he was out. Couldn't go to WrestleMania. He would have been there, obviously. So they wanted to do something to salvage Hillbilly Jim while he was on the mend. So they thought, well, let's bring in somebody for him to manage, and it ended up being his Uncle Elmer. And of course, Jim Morris knew him from Stan Frazier. He knew him from Memphis, and Jimmy Hart was managed him for a long time. So he had people who were behind him. So that was it.
We are right now as we're talking. It's May of 2025. So we're right around the 50-year anniversary of the very first Saturday Night Main Event. But in the second one in the fall, he gets married on that show.
Yeah. It was 40 years, not 50, but yeah, don't make me that old.
Oh, 40 years. That's
yeah, there you go.
I have 50. And I'm constantly living in 1975. So exactly, Kurt. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's 40 years ago. Yep.
It's remarkable. And people forget, the world is so complicated now. There's so many more channels. There's so many more television programs, much more content, everywhere you go. But back then, Saturday night's Main Event made a real impact. A lot of people watched it, and it was in the slot that was normally Saturday Night Live. And at the time too, the last wedding on national TV, on network TV, was Tiny Tim to Miss Vicky, and that was on the Johnny Carson show. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that was in the late 60s, so it had been a long time. So this got a lot of media play. This got, Stan was in the national newspapers and syndicated newspapers with his wife, Joyce, and, standing there with Hulk Hogan and Tiny Tim, and a lot of people were talking about it. He
I
was.
remember it
Yeah.
vividly. I
Mhm.
that I you know, I mean, there's things like that that I thought he pulled off really well.
Well, he had, they came up with sports entertainment at the times, sports with whatever they wanted to do, their little comedy skits and their singing and everything. Stan could do all of that. Stan wanted to be a professional singer. He was very good. Sang for years, made some recordings, but they brought in Stan. He could do comedy, he could do the singing, he could wrestle as much as he could wrestle. But he was the perfect fit for that time, and he gave them everything that they could have wanted on TNT. He was perfect. He could do it all.
Now, when I introduced you earlier in the show and was talking about Stan, I talked about him being from Philadelphia, Mississippi, but that was a gimmick, right?
Oh, sure, sure. He actually was from Pascagoula, Mississippi. He was originally from Kemper County, in Mississippi, but yeah, they moved down to Pascagoula when he was very young. Um, I mean, he may have lived in Philadelphia once upon a time in his life, but no, he was really the Pascagoula plowboy.
Did he always live there, even during his WWF run?
He lived in different places. Horn Lake, Mississippi. He had a place just outside of Nashville. He moved around a lot. But his family stayed in Pascagoula, and that was kind of his home base. When he retired, that's where he went.
You know what
So that's where.
I've heard people tell stories about him, and probably the story I hear the most is that he always carried a suitcase of jewelry and watches that he was trying to sell to the boys. Is that
Oh
accurate?
yeah. Oh well, that's for sure. I mean, he ran a series of stores for years, which a lot of people don't know as well. But no, he was always selling fake Rolex watches. That's that's what he's very, very famous for. Interesting because I think any other wrestler would have been dissuaded from doing that because, I mean, come on, it's pretty tacky. But I think everybody was kind of amused by him and saw it as harmless fun, and it was. It added to the water cooler talk in the dressing room. But I think also too, in the case of Jarrett, he kind of let him do it because if he couldn't book him, like, well, it was kind of like giving him another payday.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I say this with all empathy because I've always been a bigger type individual, not near as tall as Stan, but all of us have to be very, very careful with our health. And
Oh, of course.
Stan suffered from diabetes, didn't he?
Oh, very much so. He had a whole list of issues going on. And he's one of those people who, despite the warnings, just he was going to do what he was going to do. So
And
yeah, he was definitely diabetic.
and so, what was the last parts of his life like?
Not too happy. He died in the VA hospital. So yeah,
And
he
he
had.
had military service.
He did when he was very young. When he was 17, he joined the Navy, and his run in the Navy didn't last very long because, well, I mean, how can you clothe him?
Yeah.
No bed fit him, and he's lucky because at the time it was just after Korea. The government found that it had a surplus of soldiers and nothing to do with them, nothing to do, no place to put them, no way to employ their services. So people were granted honorable discharges if they wanted to have it. So Stan kind of saw the writing on the wall. He didn't even last 6 months in the Navy,
Hmm.
um, but
Well,
he got the military service and the health benefits, which hey, many wrestlers never got that.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel terrible that he ended up with the health issues and all that he had, but
Yeah,
I'm so glad he had somewhere to go to
absolutely.
get care.
Well, especially as big as he is, I think of somebody like Haystacks Calhoun or Kamala. Both of them got their legs amputated, and they lived in pretty deplorable conditions. You know, it was just the path that they took. Their size was that was their money, and it was their calling card, and yet it was their greatest detriment. And so when your health comes and gets you, there's no going back. I mean, Jerry Blackwell. I mean, the list goes on and on. So sad, so sad. But the fact that Stan kept wrestling, up until like 1991, 1992, it's unbelievable. But he wrestled until his doctor said, okay, you can't do this anymore.
Well,
Stop it.
Do you have a title for your book, Kurt?
I do, and it takes a little bit of explaining because I knew Joyce Frazier. We were good friends, and that was the lady that married Stan, Uncle Elmer on TV. So we wanted to do a book together about Stan and his life, but for some reason, everything kept drifting back to the subject of food because Stan was obsessed with food and he couldn't stop eating, massive amounts of food. So I said, Joyce, why don't we make this a cookbook with stories? And so it's called Cooking for a Giant or a Family of Four. Wow. That's the name. So I have Joyce's recipes, things that she actually cooked for Stan. I have some of his family recipes. And Joyce passed away, 2006 now, I believe, completely out of nowhere. And when she died, I did not know what to do without her voice, without her contribution. So I put this book on the shelf for a long time. But I just realized, if I don't tell these stories, if I don't pass on this information, the legend and legacy of Stan Frazier will pass on, and I don't want that to happen. And so I thought, here, as you mentioned, the 40th anniversary of the wedding of Uncle Elmer, it's a prime time to do it. Even on Saturday night's main event, when they have it on NBC now, Uncle Elmer is in it. He's still in that opening title sequence because he was such a big part of 80s wrestling, the expansion period of the WWF. People remember him. Yes. And that angle that he did with Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura, it was a huge, huge deal. People to this day remember it, love it, and I want to take all of those feelings and those memories that people have and just build on it and kind of flesh out the character that they only partially know.
Well, it was to my mind, having been alive and experiencing it back then, it was difficult, I think, for Stan to get over as a heel because people just saw him as being lovable. They saw him as being good-hearted, and I just he was one of the more lovable characters in the business of pro wrestling, and I appreciate you so much for documenting his life for us and preserving that piece of wrestling history. So we're all trying to do that in our own way, and Stan deserves what you're doing for him for sure.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you see it that way. For many years I would tell people in the industry or fans that I was doing a book on the guy that they remember as Uncle Elmer, and folks would say, why? Who cares about him? And yet he's one of the most interesting characters that ever existed in the business. Interesting, and as you said, caring and lovable. There was so much more to him than that just really brief run as Uncle Elmer, which was only 9 months. A 33-year career with so many, ups and downs that took him to so many places. He met so many people, made such a great impression. But he's also sort of an echo of the past, a character that might not be able to exist in the business anymore. I mean, how many giants exist in the business like a Stan Frazier? I think Viscera was the last of, and Big Show were the kind of the last of the massive human beings. Omos is kind of the modern day giant, but they don't work the same way anymore. And
well, I'm that pro wrestling geek guy who I enjoy the people like this, right? I mean, I Brian Solomon's one of my best friends, and I loved reading his book about the Sheik. And Scott Teal just came out with another book about Frankie Kane, and I loved all of that. But I got really excited because I opened up an envelope the other day, and I had a book on Bruce Swayze.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't remember Beautiful Bruce, but I was so excited that the book had been done on him, because if you don't, he for sure won't be remembered, right? And so I love that you're doing this for Stan. When do you think it'll be available?
Thank you. Well, I want it to be out hopefully before Cauliflower Alley Club so I can sell it there.
Yeah,
but certainly awesome. But certainly before the anniversary of the wedding. So I'm in the process of moving, as we talked about. So it's but the bones of it are there, and it's like 95% done. I've been trying to interview a few individuals. It's a little hard at times to peg people down, and this is after years. I'm talking years and years of trying to hunt people down.
Oh yeah.
Hillbilly Jim is still the hardest guy to interview. he doesn't talk to a lot of people, but I think speaking with him would pretty much put the period at the end of the sentence. And I'm hoping he comes through before my my time runs out.
Oh, good. Well, we'll look forward to later this fall getting the book on Stan Frazier. We've been visiting with Kurt Nielsen. Kurt, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and talking about the Plowboy.
You're more than welcome, and I'm glad that Stan's story will continue on in this format. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Kurt Nielsen on his new book about the life and work and professional wrestling career of the Plowboy, Stan Frazier. He was also the Playboy, Stan Frazier, there for a little while. And he was kayfabe from Philadelphia, Mississippi, but we cleared all that up in the interview right today. So soon as I get more information on Kurt's book, I'll pass it along here so you can get yourself a copy and add it to your pro wrestling history reading, because Frazier is one of those guys from the territory days that we'll never see again. We'll never see guys like that, right? And so having his life and career recorded is extremely valuable. Okay, speaking of Tennessee, let's stay in the Tennessee territory. 1975, this is pre-Gulas and Jarrett split, right? We're still a couple of years away from that. So we're in the summer of 75. And to help me walk through what was going on in June and July and the first parts of August is our historian and analyst for Tennessee, Tim Deals, who's written the great book about the Tennessee Athletic Commission and all the great things that happened in Tennessee wrestling history. So let's go to that right now. Here I am at the Richards Ranch talking to the great historian Tim Deals on Tennessee 1975. Hey again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Personalities, Territories, Towns, and Buildings on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. I'm your host, Tony Richards, and once again, I'm joined by the authority in Tennessee wrestling, Mr. Tim Deals. Tim, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Not sure I can live up to that introduction, but we'll give it a shot today. We'll see what we can get into.
I was on Briscoe and Bradshaw here recently, doing the life of Jim Barnett, and they introduced me as the wrestling's greatest historian. And I'm like, come on, guys, stop it, stop that.
Take it if they give it to you.
I guess. I'm like, boy, I'll never live up to that moniker. And so we've been talking about Tennessee. 1975 is an interesting year. We know that in 77, the split's going to come between Nick Gulas and Jerry Jarrett. So just focusing here on 1975, it's interesting in things that you see. I think in our last program, I mentioned that Jerry and George Goulis are teaming up on occasion.
Right.
And George is working some in both ends of the territory.
Right.
And for our fans that are just learning about Tennessee, I got to tell you, Tim, I was listening to a podcast this morning in the bathroom while I was getting ready, just trying to do whatever I do with whatever I got to work with here. And I was getting ready, and I was listening to a podcast, and these guys were talking about, and of course they were calling it Memphis because that's kind of the description it's taken on in later years. But back during this time that we're talking about, it was a completely different, full, large territory that was geographically very, very large. And they were talking about how Memphis, what the Tennessee style of wrestling to them was concession stand brawls and Frankenstein masks. And I wanted to crawl through my phone and grab them by the neck and say, "You are not fully educated on Tennessee wrestling." You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and there's some of that, but there's some of that in almost every territory at some point as well. And it is the Memphis thing, that's just kind of accepted, I guess, by most of us. I mean, I call it that too.
Of course.
Always interesting though that no matter who ran it, Nick Goulis or Jerry Jarrett, they based their office in Nashville.
Yeah.
Or the Nashville area.
And Nashville was geographically in the center, of the whole territory.
And where most everyone lived who worked that territory. Even Jerry Lawler, after the split, lived in Nashville for a time before he moved back to Memphis. I mean, it just geographically, as you said, it made sense to be there. If you're going to go to Birmingham on a Monday night, you want to drive back home, fairly easy drive, comparatively speaking, to do that to Nashville and as opposed to somewhere else.
And for those of you who are didn't catch our last show and you're just maybe new viewers or new watchers, Tim grew up in the eastern half of the territory, and I grew up in the western end. So together we got the full story.
That's right. We reach in and tag out every now and then.
That's right. And I'm always interested in Tim's viewpoint because I didn't, there's the one story of the wrestlers who ran into each other in the Tennessee territory, and the guy goes, "Oh, how long you been working here?" He said, "Oh, about a year." He goes, "Oh, I didn't even know you were working in that." They didn't see each other, for like a year.
Right. We're talking like a 7 or 8 state region at various times, particularly this time. I mean, in the mid 70s, they were really hitting a lot of places. When I was looking at this, I even remember a show that they ran in some summer of 75 in Murphy, North Carolina, which is, Western North Carolina. It's about 2 hours maybe from Chattanooga, maybe 2 hours from Asheville, over in the mountains. You didn't think Nick Goulis would run a show in North Carolina, but he did off and on. He and Roy Welch had off and on for years. It was just in that Chattanooga TV market.
Yeah.
And that's why he could do that. So you could add North Carolina to that. They didn't run regularly there, though, at the time. But I do remember in 75 seeing them plug that on a TV show. And I'm like, that's not far from where I live, one of those deals.
Speaking of Chattanooga, I had a question for you. The first card that takes place in June in Chattanooga, there's a main event that takes place that's a Georgia match. Abdullah the Butcher and Rocky Johnson.
Yeah.
And so
how did those guys get there?
Well, how often did that kind of thing happen?
Well, earlier in 1975, Nick Goulis ran his Chattanooga TV show on the CBS station in Chattanooga. Had done that since, I think, 1966. In early 1975, the NBC affiliate began airing the syndicated weekly Georgia Championship Wrestling show. I think they started like in February. Now, they weren't going to run shows in Chattanooga, but they were going to run shows every Thursday night in Rome, Georgia, which is about 75 miles south of Chattanooga, approximately the same distance from Atlanta.
Yep, that's one of the things that Jim Barnett changed.
Yes.
When he came in and took over Georgia, he stopped running Savannah on Thursday nights and started running Rome. And
Right.
then he made Savannah Sunday, like once or twice a month Sunday town, which is interesting because Savannah is like the third largest city in Georgia, but they just didn't draw as well there.
They didn't, and it was so far away. I mean, from Atlanta, most of the other cities, except with some of those southern Georgia cities, real easy driving distance. Georgia was an easy territory to drive.
Yeah.
For that, and Rome made it even easier. You didn't have to drive back and forth to Savannah. But Rocky Johnson and Abdullah the Butcher had been working in Atlanta. Rocky had come in maybe at the end of '74 to Atlanta. And so I'm pretty positive that the reason Rocky Johnson and Abdullah the Butcher are on this show in Atlanta, or I'm sorry, in Chattanooga at this time, is because people were tuning in to the show on the NBC affiliate and seeing these guys.
Yeah.
And there might have been some thought by Nick, are they going to move in on me? I don't think that was the plan at that point by Jim Barnett.
No, I actually think
George Group.
No, I actually think Jim, and I kind of talked about this a little bit on the Briscoe Bradshaw Jim Barnett show, is, Jerry Jarrett and Jim Barnett had a really close relationship.
Yes.
I don't know what the relationship with Nick was like,
Yeah.
but I know Eddie Graham and Jim, because we're about 6 months now away from TBS, which was WTCG uplinking to satellite. I think at the end of '75, going into '76, and they were on some cable companies too. They had some microwave cable hookups and surrounding Georgia. So yeah, I'm sure the penetration into that area of Tennessee was strong. I just don't know what the relationship was, but there must have been something because they ran this match, right?
They did, and you ask if it happened often. I do recall a few times after this, maybe '78 or so, where Stan Hansen worked a Chattanooga show. I believe Dusty came in and worked in a Chattanooga show, maybe Dick Slater. So every now and then you would see one of these guys float over. The interesting thing, too, about this, the appearance by Abdullah the Butcher is they got a newspaper article out of Abdullah the Butcher coming to Chattanooga. And I think it was written by, drum roll please, Ronnie Gossett.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'll see if I can dig that out for you.
Yeah, that'd be great. He was probably one of the hottest heels of the year of 1975. I mean, he had come down to Atlanta from the Detroit territory and from Maple Leaf and working up north, and he was hot. He had Rock Hunter was his manager, and he had in part of Rock Hunter's stable of heels. And the other thing too is the other people that had been on Georgia TV for the last several months were Jerry Lawler and Don Green.
Right.
And so Tennessee people probably looked at it and thought, well, Jerry Lawler's one of our people down on the Georgia show, if they were watching it.
Yeah.
Now the thing about Don Green is he was coming back under a mask, and as you and I have said before, anybody that was paying attention knew it was Don Green. He was Mr. Wrestling.
Yes, I vividly recall, and I would have been, 10 or 12 at this point. I vividly recall being at my aunt and uncle's house, and my uncle was a huge wrestling fan. Loved to go to his house to watch wrestling, and they did an interview on, I guess, the Chattanooga show, and it was Mr. Wrestling. And my uncle watched him for about 5 seconds and went, well, that's Don Green. And Don had a very distinctive Southern voice, and not just the accent, the growl. He had that growl about him too.
Right.
And I, while we're talking Don Green,
sure,
one of the most underrated talents in the business from the '50s into the '70s, in my opinion, that he could do it all. He could be the heel, he could be the face, he could work against anybody. Could do tag team or singles, just super talented and a super nice man from what I understand as well.
Yeah. His daughter is in my group on Facebook, and just a really nice young lady.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have Don Green here now at ringside after that match we just witnessed with Billy Spears. And Don, he took the title away from you. He took the belt away from you, but I don't think he won it.
No, he didn't take it. He stole it. You know, this guy has used every kind of object he can in the past few weeks, and he comes out tonight. I don't know if it was ETH or what it was, but if that's the kind of game the man wants to play, I tell you, I'd like to get a return match with him. I think I deserve one. If that's the kind of tactics he wants to use, I can use the same kind of tactics.
Well, Don, it looked like he had a sleeper hold on you, but I noticed from the way you were having to clear your vision, and there was a peculiar odor here in the auditorium. I couldn't tell what it was. Do you know what he used?
No, I don't know what it was. It was something on a handkerchief that it didn't knock me completely out. It just dazed me long enough that it cost me the match. But the man didn't beat me. He just stole the title from me, and I don't think that's the way a champion should have the title. And I think if he's any kind of champion at all, after stealing it like that, he'd give me a return match.
Do you plan to contest this decision with the NWA?
Well, you can contest it, but that don't do any good. The man got the belt. He's left the arena, so as far as the people is concerned, he's champion. The only way I can prove myself is get a return match with him.
Well, he will have to give you a return match within 30 days, will he not?
They have to give you one within 30 days, but I may not be around that long, so I'd rather have one as soon as I can get it, because I don't want to wait 30 days.
Well, I'd suggest you take it up with the promoters, because I know they saw what took place here. It was, I'll tell you, that he earns the name the Mad Magician, because he's slippery in that ring. You can't tell what he's doing.
You never know what the man's going to come out with. Every week is something different. Well, I tell you, he's got the belt. I want a return match, and I'll do anything to get it. I'll put up anything. I'll walk a mile or whatever it takes to get the match. But I want a return match, and as soon as possible.
Okay, Don, I know you're anxious to get to the showers, and appreciate you stopping by. Don Green stopping by for a brief interview after that match with Billy Spears, in which Billy Spears used some foreign object or some chemical compound of some sort to stun him long enough for him to get the pin and take the title of U.S. Junior Heavyweight Champion.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
You know, the other thing about the territory that we haven't talked about yet is, you know, Nick had a lot of different tag titles, and Memphis usually had the NWA Southern tag titles.
Yes.
Birmingham usually had the Southeastern tag titles.
Right.
And then here in Chattanooga, it's the U.S. tag titles, right?
Yeah, U.S. tag titles. And I did see also Nashville had the Tennessee tag titles for a little while, which is basically a Knoxville-based tag championship.
Yep.
Yeah,
in that period now, since Ron Fuller had bought Knoxville in the fall of '74, those Tennessee tag titles had floated, just like the talent had floated back and forth. Yeah. Those titles did too. Yeah,
and they eventually, I believe it was in '75, maybe around September or so. I think it was in '75 when they kind of renamed the tag titles Southeastern tag titles for Knoxville. But yeah, those Tennessee tag titles, they don't show up every now and then, usually with Ron Don on a Goodless card, usually with Ron Don Wright defending them or chasing them. But in Chattanooga, yeah, the U.S. tag titles, and they might have been defended some maybe in Huntsville and Birmingham, you know, maybe in Nashville, some, particularly the eastern end. They were prevalent this particular summer. I don't recall exactly who I recall seeing hold them first. I do know that Otto von Heller and Carl von Steiger with Sam Bass were tag champions. Yep. And they feuded with Tojo Yamamoto and Tommy Rich. And this may have been one of the first titles Tommy held.
Yeah, Tommy, this is his rookie year, I think.
Yes.
And he now he's about 6 months in here going into the summer, and they're starting to work him up the pyramid.
They are. And I took a little bit of deep dive, maybe ankle deep dive on Tom and looking at this, trying to figure out what year he really started. I think he probably started at some point in '74, probably doing some TV matches, but they bring him along and you see him in early '75 where he's working low matches on house card shows, usually maybe taking a loss. And then they begin to pump him up a little bit. And interestingly, before they really pair him with Tojo, they feed him to the Mongolian Stomper.
Yeah,
right.
right. Who's the new hot heel in the
Yes,
territory?
he is who's going to replace Ron Fuller as the lead heel. Of course, Ron switched back to babyface right prior
Sure.
to Stomper coming
And
in.
he kind of worked as a tweener.
He really was. He really was back and forth. And for me, remembering the Fullers, they had always been the good guys, right? And for Ron to come in and be a bad guy, I'm like, man, what is this? What happened to you?
Right.
And but he eventually turned back around. And well, Tommy Rich was one of the guys that helped get the Stomper over real quick. They would put him in a match. They'd bring the Stomper into town, and they would say the Stomper's going to wrestle two guys tonight. Tommy Rich and Jerry Bryant, or Tommy Rich and Dennis Condrey.
Right.
And the Stomper would go through and just eat these guys alive. And then a couple of weeks later, you see Tommy in a tag team with Tojo Yamamoto, and they are bringing Tommy along, very similar manner in which they brought Jerry Jarrett along.
Mm-hmm.
Here's Tojo, the experienced vet, who's going to be a mentor to this young talent, Tommy Rich. And that rub of the experience and Tommy being young and new in the business and wanting to learn helps make Tommy Rich a star in this territory within a few months. I mean, he's right at the top of the cards in tag team matches this summer.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about Ken Lucas, and I was talking about how Ken Lucas started in the Amarillo territory,
Mm-hmm.
and he stood in the back of the arena and watched Dory Funk Sr. every night. And it was that same Southern baby face that's undersized that basically takes a butt whipping all the way down to where you think they're going to die, and then they start the slow comeback, right?
Right.
And of course, Tommy wasn't at the place in his career to do quite that yet. He was just taking the butt kicking, but eventually they're going to have him start making those comebacks.
Yes. Yes. He was good at that. He was very good at that. Ken Lucas, another, underrated guy that I hope we don't ever forget. Great worker. But, not getting off topic of Tommy here. I think Tommy had a lot going for him, didn't he? I mean, he was.
Oh yeah.
He when you look at a wrestling match, particularly Tennessee wrestling, as we want to call it, or Memphis, if you want to call it that.
For those of you who think it's just Frankenstein mask and concession, listen up. Tim's about to tell you something important here.
I don't know about that. I think part of Tommy's appeal was maybe two-pronged or maybe three-pronged. He was a good-looking guy, so the women liked him, right?
Right.
But he was enough all shucks, good old boy that a lot of the guys liked him. You had to cheer for him, right? And he had that underdog mentality going for him. And then he had that white blonde hair, like you do, Tony.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Mine's aged though. Tommy's was converted, maybe, but
however, Tommy had that white blonde hair, and so when you bust him up on TV camera, it's just vivid.
Oh yeah,
right?
The red just jumps out at you.
It just jumps out at you, and that's where you get your sympathy for a baby face, and then hopefully Tommy makes a comeback, or he's going to get revenge down the road, and teaming in with Tojo, being able to watch somebody like Tojo night after night, that's got to be invaluable experience.
I'm sure he rode
how to work a crowd, and
I'm sure he rode with him. Probably rode with him, and Tojo probably taught the whole time.
Yeah, made him drive.
Yeah. Made him, do the facials and all that, and
yeah. Oh yeah.
He just got the opportunity of a lifetime to ride with a guy like that and learn and tag with him every night,
Yeah. And of course, Tojo had done that with Jerry Jarrett, and we'll throw George Goulas in there too. Tojo teamed some with George Goulas around this time. I'm not going to go into the merits of George Goulas. Enough people say what they want to say about him, and that's kind of tiresome in a lot of ways, at least to me. Let's move on and what have you. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
And a lot of times people say that stuff never saw him. They
Yeah,
just have heard.
absolutely.
They just heard.
Absolutely.
They just heard things.
Yeah, Daddy said sell.
Yeah.
You know.
Before we get away from the tag title thing, I just wanted to say that, the world tag title sounds big and the Southeastern sounds big. And they were going to call the promotion Southeastern. So that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But, I love the state titles. Like I really
absolutely.
do. I just thought it localized your promotion so well to
Yes.
have state. I mean, I understand. I love the Southern titles, but having the Tennessee tag title, I just really, really liked that. And
Yes.
I was sad to see that go away.
Hey, and being from Kentucky, I don't know if you've probably seen this, and I'll have to dig out the clip for you. April 9, I think it's April 9. I think that's the date I've got written down there. Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Bryant and Tommy Rich billed as Kentucky Tag Champions.
Right. I think that might be the only time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably Tommy's first tag title.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But that's probably some titles that Nick had in his office,
Yeah. Joe Ball and Bill Helm couldn't make it this week, so we're going to give them to Tommy and Jarek.
That's right. Yeah. No, I wish I'd been aware of that at some point. I didn't realize it was in this particular time frame.
Yeah.
But I always wish they would have done more with those.
Yeah. Yeah, and they could have. I mean, I don't know, lost opportunity.
So what'd you think about the Stomper overall as a heel?
He was so unusual as a regular in the territory at this time because so many of we're really at the end of a transition period of sorts because the territory has moved from a tag team territory into more of a singles focus when they renamed the Southern title from the Southern Junior Heavyweight title in '74, I think.
Right.
And you begin to get this focus of Jerry Lawler going to be the star of the territory, even though that kind of gets derailed here. And in the meantime, you have Ron Ford come in and Mongolian Stomper come in. But as a heel, there were very few like him. You talk about a Frankenstein mask. Well, this guy didn't need a Frankenstein mask, right? I mean, he was a monster heel, but he was believable. He was in tremendous shape. When he came in the ring, he just he took care of business right away. Had to have a manager because he wasn't going to talk to you. I mean, there are a few interviews that he did out there, but not many.
Most people associate him with Don Carson, and also later at the end of this particular year of '75, he's going to team up with J.J. Dillon's going to be his manager. But in this run here in Tennessee, he's got Bearcat Wright.
Bearcat Wright, who was as big as the Stomper, right? I mean, Bearcat was a big man.
Yeah, and he could talk.
And good on the microphone, too.
Yeah. Yeah, he could talk.
Yeah, he was great. It was an interesting pairing. And Bearcat wasn't around wrestling a whole lot more after this. I think he did a run in Georgia and maybe a few other places.
Yeah, I think that's why this particular thing is so unusual because it's just a few months. I mean, Stomper isn't really here that long. But they brought him into Memphis, and that's where he beat Fuller for the title. And then they had like 3 return matches, and then they fed Robert Fuller to him. And then they in Evansville and Louisville, they teamed the Stomper. They paired him up with Tojo, and then Jackie Fargo had singles matches with him. And in I was going to ask you this question too. I think it was Louisville, might have been Evansville. I can't remember. One of those, they had Tojo and Stomper in what they called a wire match, which was essentially a cage match, I'm sure. Right. But was that a different kind of cage? Do you remember, or was that one of those chicken wire?
I would say it was probably chicken wire.
One of those, with the lumber kind of construction things.
Yeah. Probably the cheapest, the cheapest you could get to string around the ring.
Well, I've seen them set out it. They set it up like around ringside and with the ring in it, and then I've seen them set it up on the apron. So I don't know which this was, but it was a wire. It was called a wire match.
Yeah, and I've seen them called bull wire matches or chicken wire matches, and And I think of bull wire matches as, kind of the big, kind of a square
Yeah.
type of fence instead of the barbed wire.
Was that a match they did in Chattanooga very often?
A wire?
Oh, yeah, a cage
Yeah,
match.
they did
or what?
some.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a few. Probably a little more prevalent later in the 70s, I would think. I'd have to look, though. That's just a guess on my part.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, go ahead.
talking about the Stomper, he had a couple of things that were really awesome about him. He didn't like to hear crowd noise. And how did he communicate that? He covered his ears and he kind of pouted and eventually wore headgear to drown out the crowd. But man, what an easy way to get heat, right? Is just to say this guy doesn't like crowd noise, so don't cheer.
Right.
And you get the crowd all involved in the match. He had the Shanidamaki, however that's really pronounced and spelled. Good luck with that. I've never quite known how to spell it, but that was another gimmick that he had that maybe a lot of folks didn't have in it. One particular finisher.
Yeah, eventually, isn't that the same thing that Sergeant Slaughter used? They called it the Cobra hold.
But the way it was billed, it was unique at the time. Not many people knew it. It was mysterious and that type of thing adds to the mystique of it.
Right.
And it was pretty cool to do that. Oh man, I was going to mention some. Oh, I know one of the other guys, and you may be going to talk about this, and I don't know. I don't know if I should or not. One of his opponents during this summer was the magnificent Zulu.
Oh, yeah.
Who is Ron Pope, who tremendous physique, but from all accounts in the ring wasn't very good. And also was controversial behind the scenes. He was very demanding for right or for wrong on whatever issue it is. But he rarely stayed anywhere long. But he got an opportunity here to work the Stomper, the lead as the lead face against the Stomper for a few shows in Memphis, and he was on some cards that drew some tremendous crowds in Memphis, and I'm sure throughout the territory as well. But you notice he's in maybe July or so, and by the end of August, you see him go down the card.
Yeah,
he's in tag matches or lower singles matches on a card, and he's gone by October.
Which was sort of that was common in his career. That happened almost in every territory where he was kind of what you'd call like a shooting star. It'd be real bright for a couple of weeks and then kind of start to tail off. And some of it probably had to do with things away from the ring.
Yeah. For right or for, as we said, for right or for wrong.
Right. Just was what it was.
Yeah. That's just what happened. The interesting thing, though, is after Zulu, the Stomper gets into a feud with Bob Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gold, right? It's not just gold for now, but it's gold when they take it to Knoxville. And it's gold when they take it to Alabama. And they take it back to Knoxville. And they take, these guys worked each other for years. And it never got old when the Stomper and Bob Armstrong got in the ring.
That's right. Yeah, that feud went on for a decade, or more.
Yes.
Jackie Fargo and Mr. Wrestling. So we talked about Don Green being Mr. Wrestling, and they team him up with Fargo. They have all these great. It just seems like they play a little bit of musical chairs during this particular year, where you have the traditional teams you're used to, like Jerry Jarrett and Tojo, and you have Fargo and Tojo. And they mix them all up, and go in a little bit different direction. What do you think the thinking is here?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they felt a need to to avoid being stale. Maybe I mean, would another run by Jerry Jarrett and Jackie Fargo work? Or you did have Tojo bringing along Tommy Rich.
And they did the gimmick with Luke Graham. They kind of did that deal, with Jackie Fargo and Luke Graham.
And the payoff for Tojo and Tommy Rich really comes the following year when Tommy's headlining shows in Memphis against Jerry Lawler.
Mhm.
I think that happened in '76. But yeah, there's some musical chairs for sure going on there. Jackie's still pretty active. Jackie had some company this summer, late in the summer, from his brothers uh, as well. But yeah, it's interesting too that Don Green was stuck in there under the mask when everybody kind of knew who he was. Um, and then he and Lawler just come off that run in Florida where they were the superstars
Yeah.
when he came back. I don't know. Yeah, the other thing about Don Green that's interesting is he was a businessman in Nashville. His family owned a hardware store in downtown Nashville, and you wonder how one of the meanest, baddest guys on the wrestling circuit, how that played, when you went into the hardware store. But I think in Nashville they had softened Don's image up some because he was a TV announcer there in a lot of the early '70s, I believe. And but yeah, Fargo and Green, good tag team. Even if he wasn't wearing a Frankenstein mask, if he
Yeah.
Mr. Wrestling mask.
Yeah. Carl von Steiger and Otto von Heller, they teamed on and off too in different territories. Now, Carl von Steiger had spent the previous year, '74, in Amarillo, and his tag team partner out there was Siegfried Steinke.
Right.
And so they split up. Steinke went up to Portland and Vancouver, and von Steiger came here and teamed up with Von Heller. In '75, the Nazi German gimmick is starting to get, I mean, we're now, 30 years past the World War II?
Yeah.
I mean, in the '50s and the '60s, it was a hot gimmick. I mean, it really was. I mean, the Von Brauners, I was scared to death of them,
Sure.
But what is it here in '75? I mean, it's starting to get a little old, but they still are working on top here. Like, is it still work? Does it still work here in Tennessee?
It apparently did, at least through the summer. I'm like you. I thought about that when I was looking at this, thinking, man, they really did run that. I mean, and I believe one of them had the cape with the swastika
Yeah.
on the back. They may both have.
They had matching capes at one time. Now I don't know if they did here or not, but yeah, they had matching gimmicks.
Yeah. Apparently, I don't know. But at the same time, one of those other tropes from pro wrestling's history, the evil Japanese guy, was Tojo Yamamoto, who's now a babyface.
Right.
So, it did seem a little bit behind the times. For a more modern heel gimmick during this time, you had Chris Colt and Mike Boyette come in for a while as the hippies, which at least, you're a few years removed from the late '60s, early '70s when that was a movement. But yeah, the Germans at that time, Von Heller and Von Steiger, good workers and a pretty good tag team. But that gimmick did seem to be a little old. I mean, you wonder if they couldn't have gone still teamed them, but gone in a different direction where they weren't playing up that stereotypical.
And those two guys could have just been good workers. They didn't have to rely so much on the gimmick. They could have just been like the Road Warriors. They could have just been big, strong guys that were hard to pin.
And did their manager Sam Bass agree with their philosophy? Yeah,
right.
I don't know.
Yep, that's right. I forgot Sam was with them.
Yeah, he was their manager for a while.
Now, there's another guy here. You talked about the heel Japanese, but there's a Mr. Suzuki in the territory, and he gets paired up with Tojo in some judo jacket matches.
Yeah.
And Tojo also does some judo jacket matches with Bill Dundee as well.
Yeah.
Now, is George Barnes gone for good here? Was he split that one little run they had from April and May, and then George went back to Australia and never came back? He came back years later.
Back. Yeah. George and Bill, I think, started at the very end of January, beginning of February. Hot right off the bat. I mean, those guys were hot. There is some YouTube clips, at least one I know of, where Lance Russell interviews George Barnes and Bill Dundee at the Mid-South Coliseum right as they were brand new in the territory, and they come off just great as cocky, arrogant heels, and maybe that was, we're talking about the stereotypical German heels, Well, here you got those nasty Australians coming in, and
Yeah.
and it's, I think a lot of the appeal with Barnes and Dundee were they were really wide open. They
Yeah.
they didn't mind brawling, which fit into the Tennessee style with some of these guys.
Yeah.
Right off
They
the
didn't
bat.
mind working fast.
They did, and so by the end of May, after this run, where really one of the big their major opposition was the Fullers, was Robert Fuller, and then Buddy Fuller gets back into things
Right.
in the spring, and then eventually Ron comes back to help out. That's one of their big battles during this time. But by the time May comes around, George is homesick and he wants to go home. And so he goes back to Australia. Bill has brought his family over, and Bill just stays forever, right?
Yeah. Well, we were on the
becomes a legend in the territory. And as you said, there are so few things that you can really point to. Wow, what a payoff! But when Barnes left, I don't remember there being saying, well, George went back to, and they may have said something like that, but Dundee was on his own, so you got to find something for Bill to do.
Yeah.
And of course they did. But man, your payoff is 12 years later in 1987 when George comes back, and George wants to team with Bill, and they team. And I think Rocky Johnson was kind of the in between the two, and George and Bill finally do that feud. I wonder what would they have done with Bill and George if they had stayed. I think maybe they'd had another run as through another tag championship as heels, and then maybe you flip them and let them be the fan favorites for a time, or obviously split them against each other, which happened 12 years later. So how many fans are around in 87 that remember them from 75? Because if you were, there's your payoff.
Well, this Tojo and Tommy Rich, I would have fed them to Bill and George. Like I would have had them have a program together. That would have been good.
That would have been great.
I on the Briscoe and Bradshaw show, the Jim Barnett show. Well, I don't think it made the show. I don't think I said it while we were recording. I think it was a conversation offline. But I said, well, you guys know that Jim Barnett is responsible for Bill Dundee being in Memphis all those years.
Yes.
And they're like, what? And I said, well, he offered the booking job in Australia to Jerry Jarrett, and he turned him down. Yeah. And he said, do you know anybody that I could hire? And then he, the Crown guy,
Bobby Shane.
Yeah, he recommended Bobby Shane. And then Bobby Shane goes over to Australia, and he tells Bill Dundee and George Barnes they need to go to Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so they go to Tennessee, and Bill Dundee stays forever. Still there. Still there.
Yeah, still there. You can book him for your next appearance, really, if you need him.
That's right. Funny how those connections, wind up like that,
And that's part of why I love looking at these things. You see those connections. Who would have ever thought Bobby Shane and Jim Barnett, and then Bill Dundee ends up in Memphis, and Jerry Lawler in there too. And Lawler and Dundee obviously become a huge, huge item later on. And they first meet later in the year, I believe, this year. But they kind of struggle with Dundee, kind of finding him a place, I think, during the summer, because he'd been there with Barnes, and what do you do with him? And he's a little bit shorter, stockier, and they plug him in some places, and they finally kind of in the fall figure out what to do with him, and that's flip him into a baby face. I wanted to also mention one of the guys that was in here in 75 that was around for into at least the spring of 75. I don't know that we mentioned him last time, but he's also a guy from Australia, and his name's Johnny Gray.
Yeah.
Johnny was in here
he's often forgotten when talking about Bill Dundee and George Barnes, but he was a big part of that.
He was a big part of it. He was kind of the third wheel with them at various times. And he had come over before Dundee and Barnes with a guy that's probably much more well-known, to fans in the Northeast, and that's Tony Gurria. He and Tony Gurria came over and worked Florida, and then Tony goes to the Northeast and becomes a big star and does some traveling in territories. But Johnny Gray, I think, only worked Florida and Tennessee, and then he went to Australia. He was a good little worker. He reminded me physically a little bit of Dundee, a little, kind of a stocky guy up top. And I believe he went back and continued to wrestle for a few years in Australia. And I think eventually ran a gym over there after he retired from the business. And I think he's still living. Johnny Gray. Then there's some clips of him online too, not just from Tennessee territory, but from Australia as well.
Yeah, I had trouble tracking down a photo of him when I was posting some just matches and stuff in the Facebook group, but and I hate that because he during this time he was a really important guy in the territory.
Yes,
I mean on the heel side he was,
and in late in '74 and into '75 he was paired with Big Bad John.
Yeah.
For a short time, which is interesting because Big Bad John had spent time in Australia the previous few years as a major heel over there. So they had to have known each other from then, I would imagine.
Back to Chattanooga, Chattanooga, I mentioned that they had the Ron Fuller and Mongolian Stomper program in Memphis for several weeks. The other thing they did in Memphis here during the late spring and summer was they had about 5 Ron Fuller and Jack Briscoe matches.
Yes.
Where Jack Briscoe came in and defended the title while Ron was the Southern champion.
Yep.
And then they ran the Mongolian Stomper program, and about the only other town that they ran Mongolian Stomper and Ron Fuller was Chattanooga. And they ran Ron worked in Chattanooga more than any other town besides Memphis. Was that the proximity to Knoxville, or was that?
I would say it. I'd say so. And here's the thing, because I'm glad you mentioned this, because this is one of the things I looked at. And when Ron on his podcast, Ron Fuller's talked about working mostly in Memphis, and just as a real quick glance, Ron in January worked Memphis and Louisville. February, Memphis, Louisville, and Evansville. Memphis and Louisville in March, and the same in April. In May, I have him listed for a card in Blytheville, Arkansas, which seems a little unusual, but maybe it's a misprint. It was Robert instead. I don't know.
Well, the only thing I can figure there is that was a Herb Welch town.
It was. So Herb might have got his nephew over.
That's what I'm thinking. Come on, do Uncle Herb a favor.
And like you said, he worked Chattanooga and Louisville. He never, you notice what's missing here in these towns. He's working Memphis and Louisville. Louisville's pretty close to Knoxville, right?
Yeah.
And Chattanooga also pretty close to Knoxville, a little over 100 miles from Knoxville to Chattanooga. You don't see Nashville. You don't see Birmingham. You don't see Huntsville. You don't see Jackson, Bowling Green.
No, the southern part, the southern half, he doesn't work.
Right. He ends up coming to Birmingham some in September, I believe, for a few shows. But I don't think he ever worked Nashville at this time frame. And that might have been because it was more Nick's town.
And that's something too that a lot of people either they don't know or they don't remember is Jackie Fargo is so associated with Memphis, but he mainly worked Nashville and Birmingham.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And some Chattanooga.
And Chattanooga, yeah. And of course, Jackie lived. That was probably an easier drive for him. And being the star he was, I'd say he had that perk if he wanted to or not. And the other thing that keeping him out of Memphis kept him special when he did come back. And particularly after what they had ran the year before, where Lawler kind of defeated him for the King of Memphis title. So, but when Fargo came back later on, it was pretty much gold when he came to Memphis. But you're right, he worked a lot in Nashville and Chattanooga and Birmingham, particularly from this point forward.
There's another guy who's in here in the summertime that he formerly was a huge star in the Tennessee territory, and that's Dennis Hall.
Dennis Hall, yeah, and I believe Dennis for a time lived in Chattanooga, actually. it seemed like I had an address on him here locally, and I was going to drive by there one day, even though it's been 50 years. But Dennis always came across as a nice, clean baby face, and he was always the rule follower. Even though I think in '76 they turned him heel for a time, which was just a shock because he was
Right.
always the good guy.
Right. He was
And
the ultimate babyface worker.
and he's a lot like Ken Lucas in the fact that he could do it all from that standpoint. And he and Lucas were a tag team off and on for several years, and a very good tag team, dating back into the '60s and into the '70s. They headlined the territory several times. And and this was probably near the end of Dennis's career, because I do remember later in the '70s, I think he moved to Georgia. You would see him on Georgia TV a good deal, putting guys over maybe in a tag match. But this was, getting near the time, I think, when he was getting more out of the business than he was getting more involved in it. I'm trying to remember some of the things. I remember he obviously teamed with George Goodless a good deal, and Ken Lucas. But when you talk about this territory, so much of '50s into about the mid '70s, it's all about the tag teams.
Right.
And Dennis Hall is in that with several, especially Ken
Les
Lucas.
Thatcher
And Les
people.
Thatcher, yes, that's what I was going to mention. He and Les Thatcher and Roger Kirby
Yep.
were the cousins. And I believe he and Roger may have been related by marriage, or was that Les?
I'm not sure.
I'm
I
not
thought
sure
there
either.
was some actual connection there, though.
Yeah, I think so too. And Dennis worked with Dick the Bruiser. Initially, I think it's Dennis Dolly, I think is how he started. And then he moved on later on to Dennis Hall and worked this territory, oh man, for a good decade.
Yeah.
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 Off and on.
Another guy who's in here working, who's going to become a pretty large name in Tennessee, is Dennis Condrey.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him because Dennis came in probably in the spring or late winter. And Dennis had been around a few years. He had a father-in-law who had been involved in the business.
What did he
And,
do, Tim?
huh?
What did his father-in-law do?
I think was he Bill Bowman?
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's right. Yep. It was Bill Bowman. He'd been one of the interns, right?
Yeah, I think it was Bill. Anyway, Dennis had been around the business some. He'd worked down in Alabama some, I think.
Bill had worked as, did he work as Bill Sky?
Bill Sky with Joe Sky or Joe Turner.
Joe Turner, and they were the interns and a couple
Yeah.
other teams. Yeah.
And Dennis comes in here and he's a baby face. So he's a young good guy. He's one of those young lions, up and comer type deal.
Yeah.
And later in the summer, they pair him with Phil Hickerson. And then we're getting into talking about one of my favorite tag teams of all time. But Dennis, what I thought about Dennis at the time was he was for his age, he was kind of ahead of his time in the fact that he did a lot of suplexes and a lot of moves that you didn't normally see in Tennessee at the time. And so when they announced on television that Dennis Condrey was going to be teaming with Phil Hickerson, I was like, oh my goodness, what's happened to Dennis? And he's teaming with Phil Hickerson. And Hickerson, for those that know of him, he had been in part of the tag team with Al Green for about the previous year. They called themselves the Sherman Tanks, and Sam Bass was their manager. And the thing about Hickerson that I loved and still love to this day, and people, there are people who look at Phil Hickerson and go, oh my goodness, look at the gut, this, that, and the other, and they judge him by that. But back in this time,
kind of had short legs.
Yeah, back in this time frame, when he got on the microphone and told you bunch of rednecks, I'm going to beat you up, and something of that nature, you believed him.
But
to me, he was believable enough to where he was like the guy my cousin married that I wanted to punch in the face. Just the, he just came across as a small town bully.
Yeah.
And
he's
I
another
think that
guy
really
that
got over well. Kind of like Al Green. I think he patterned himself after Al Green a lot.
another guy that got shortchanged in video,
Yes.
because you only saw him in the 80s, and
Yes.
he had gained more weight, and he had a ridiculous gimmick. And
Yeah.
but man, in the 70s, Phil Hickerson from Jackson, Tennessee. If I was going to be in a bar fight, I'd want Phil on my side.
Let me tell you one of my favorite wrestling memories is I was living in Jackson, Tennessee in 1988. And Jerry Jarrett brought a show to the Coliseum there. And it was wonderful because the card had Tojo Yamamoto on it, Robert Fuller, Jimmy Golden were on the show.
Wow.
Jeff Jarrett was on the show. Jerry Lawler was on the show. Jerry Jarrett was in Lawler and Jeff's corner. You had Scott Steiner, young Scott Steiner on the show. And his opponent that night was Phil Hickerson from Jackson, Tennessee. And Phil was the heel, and Scott was the big muscle guy, the good-looking guy, right? And Phil won that match by pulling a chain out and clocking Scott Steiner, and the place erupted.
I bet.
Because this was the hometown guy, right?
Oh, everybody in Jackson
he
knows
won
Phil.
just like he always won. Yeah.
Everybody in Jackson knew Phil.
Absolutely.
I had an ex-wife who was from Jackson, Tennessee, and she and her sister and everybody knew Phil, and I got to know Phil, and yeah, everybody in Jackson. I can just imagine the pop that generated. Because everybody was probably there. He probably knew everybody there.
He probably knew everybody. That's probably half the crowd was there, or over half the crowd there to see just Phil. And I wasn't really smart to the business at the time. I'd kind of stopped watching a lot of it, but I knew it was in town, and I thought I think I'll just go over here and watch the show. And I did. And when the place erupted, I just almost busted out laughing, going, "Oh my goodness!" Yeah, you're not supposed to cheer for the bad guy winning that way, but they did.
Phil was on a morning radio show there in Jackson for years.
Mm-hmm.
For years, I think he retired in 2015 or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But what a perfect guy for radio. I mean,
can
you imagine waking up and turning on Phil Hickerson every morning? I mean,
that's right.
It'd be pretty cool.
Speaking of Jackson, David Schultz is another guy that began working around this time too, very young in his career. From Jackson.
Yep, he's a Rhode Island Red in some of these matches here. You also wanted to mention about the Coliseum in Jackson.
Absolutely. Let me find my notes here. Something happened in '75 at the Jackson Coliseum. For those that may not know, Jackson is, I would say, 120 miles west of Nashville. It's about a 2-hour drive from Nashville to Jackson. And it's about 85, 90 miles east of Memphis. So it's closer to Memphis than it is Nashville. But it's a pretty good sized city.
It's right. It's on the interstate between the two cities.
Yes, it's on the interstate between the two cities. And there are a lot of farming communities around there. At least there used to be.
Just south of theirs where the Buford Pusser stuff all happened.
Yeah.
The Walking Tall movie was filmed. And
that's right. Jackson was a regular stop for many, many years for Welch and Goulas. And for many years, their show was held at the National Guard Armory. We're going to go back into a little bit of Jackson wrestling history before we talk about what happened in '75, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love it.
I know you love talking about venues, and I do too.
And I was going to ask you, has all through the Goulas Welch history, has it always been a Thursday night town?
I think so. It seems that way, largely a Thursday night town. And then later on, it became a weekend town. When Jarrett was there, it was run on Sunday nights a lot.
Yeah, okay.
But the National Guard Armory that was in Jackson was the first National Guard Armory built in the state of Tennessee, and it was built in the very early 1930s. And, a National Guard Armory holds equipment, holds ammunition, might hold people staying there to look after all this stuff. But, one of the other things that this armory had was a place to hold an event. And so this is where wrestling was held at for so many years. Well, a bad thing happened after about 30 years, and that was in April of 1965, it burned. The National Guard Armory burned to the ground. So you can imagine the ammunition being burned up and the equipment being burned up. Estimated damage at the time was over $1 million.
Tim, did any of it blow up, or I mean, was there that kind of ammunition? Where
apparently it did sound like a lot of gunfire.
Yeah, I would.
And thick smoke.
Yeah.
Now here's the deal: the night before, we'll just throw this in there. I don't think there's any true connection. The night before, there'd been a wrestling show there. This was in April of '65. Ronnie Etchison against Chris Averoff, and Herb Welch, our favorite, Herb and Chief Crazy Horse, against the masked big heads.
I don't know
whoever they are.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
I don't either. Ringside $1.25, general admission $1, balcony 75 cents, kids 50 cents, and if you took the newspaper ad in, you got another quarter off. So what a deal for a night of entertainment at the Armory. And then later that night, the Armory burns to the ground. So one of the things is in wrestling is you got to have somewhere to hold an event, right?
Yeah.
And there was no Coliseum in Jackson at this point. So this was one of those places that you did where events were held. And so what do? I mean, you could probably go to a local high school and say, can we run a show here? But you might run into opposition with that because, well, we only want high school events there. Or, you run into board members that may balk at that or may want a piece of the gate, and you may not be willing to do that.
Sure.
So for a few years, wrestling for the most part was pretty dark in Jackson in the mid 60s. But one of the things that was going on while they were talking about rebuilding the Armory was there was also talk about building a Coliseum. And in '64, the Mid-South Coliseum was built in Memphis. And it was a huge hit, huge success right off the bat. And so Jackson officials looked at the success of the Mid-South Coliseum and said, we can do that. And if you look at the pictures of the Jackson Coliseum and the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, they're very, very similar. It's that spaceship dome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can remember pulling into the Jackson Coliseum years ago for the first time, and I thought, this looks like the Mid-South Coliseum, even then. And so they built the Coliseum, and it opened in early 1968, 5,000-seat arena. It was built to also complement Jackson High School, which was right next door. So Jackson High School was also going to use the facilities for their PE classes. So it was multifunction for the community, which probably helped sell that. $2 million cost, and it was, again, modeled after the Mid-South Coliseum. And it became the home of pro wrestling in Jackson in 1969. And that's the first time they ran a show, May 14, 1969. Cora Combs and Kathy Branch worked the show.
Is that right?
Corsica Joe and Heinrich von Boulder. I don't know. Maybe he was one of the masked big heads. I don't know.
Could be.
They paired up and took on the mighty Yankees, and there was also one other match, which no doubt pitted one of the Yankees against either Joe or von Boulder. That was the first show in the Jackson Coliseum. Now, let me throw this out there while we wrap up the National Guard Armory talk.
Okay.
You would think they would want to rebuild that thing, just security reasons, right? I mean, it's vital to some security issues, I would think.
Yeah.
They kicked that football around for many years politically, and the National Guard Armory in Jackson was not built until 1971. So they went 6 years without a National Guard Armory, and by that time, obviously, you didn't need it for wrestling because the Coliseum had opened.
Yeah.
And the Coliseum, now known as Oman Arena or Oman Coliseum, it was named after a coach at Jackson High School named Turi Oman, I believe, and he coached everything. He coached ladies basketball, men's basketball, baseball, football. He was a very accomplished in all those things. So that's where the name Oman comes from. and they renamed that in 1989. And I'll throw this in too about this, and if you've got anything to add about the Coliseum, you can, or Jackson, is it really is one of the last arenas to hold kind of what we consider old school wrestling, because Burt Prentice ran the Coliseum just even a few years ago before his death. The arena he used was the Coliseum in Jackson, Oman Arena. And he did things from a promotional standpoint, kind of the old way, selling tickets and sponsorships and those type things. And Burt didn't make a fortune, but he didn't go out of business either.
Yeah. And so that burned in 75, or it was damaged, or what happened there?
Yeah, I forgot about that. I'm glad you mentioned that. In 75, a tornado came through Jackson. Actually, a couple of tornadoes came through, but the second one that came through in April ripped part of the roof of the Coliseum off.
Oh, boy.
So you've got this building that's not even been there 10 years, and they lose part of the roof. And so, what do you do as a promotion then? Because you probably had shows booked every Thursday night for the next several months, and you can't have them there. So again, wrestling goes dark, but they fixed this really quickly. And in June 19 of 75, they come back into the Coliseum. It was one of the first events back in the Coliseum after it had been repaired. You've got a match you talked about a moment ago, the Stomper and Tojo Yamamoto, Chris Colt, Mike Boyette, Eddie Marlin, Jimmy Golden, Al Green, Phil Higgerson, Bill Dundee, Lorenzo Parente, George Goulas and Jerry Barber, Norvell Austin, Randy Fargo, and a Battle Royal. Had a big card to celebrate coming back to the Coliseum.
And producer Jake put those clips up that you sent us, those clippings about the tornado in Jackson and the Coliseum damage. And so where did they run in the meantime?
I don't think they did in Jackson. Are you talking about another city?
No, I know they ran another city on Thursday night, but
I don't think they did. I think they were kind of out of luck in that regard.
They started running Paducah again on Thursday nights in this month, but I think they were gonna run both of them. It wasn't in place of Jackson; it was in addition to Jackson, because they typically ran 2 to 3 towns a night, and Paducah was always been a Thursday night town as long as I can remember. You had that period of time in there in 72, 73, 74 where Phil Golden ran, and Goulas just stopped running. They ran together there for a while, but then Goulas stopped running. And then when Golden went out of business, then about 6 months went by. And now in June, Goulas has come back to Paducah. And they run the IBEW building, which was an electricians union. They built that building. We kind of called it the sports arena. It was a little building there on Broadway in Paducah. And Golden ran there, and Goulas ran there, and I think they ran up until the Poffos maybe came in, and then when the Poffos came in with ICW, they ran the National Guard Armory in Paducah, like we were saying. A lot of wrestling companies ran armories back in
Yes, they did, and that's one of the things about some of the smaller cities that might not have a coliseum or an arena. Where do you run? You run a high school gym. And like I said, with those, usually you get the gym if you're part of a sponsorship from, the quarterback club or something like that. And it was harder sometimes to get into a place like that where an event could be held, as opposed to renting an arena.
If
it was available.
I was going to look here. And see if I had it. I thought I had it. Thought I had the clipping for the Paducah show. Well, producer Jake will put it up, but I was gonna see if I could see who the local promoter was. When Goulas ran there before for a little while, they didn't run the IBEW building. They ran St. Mary's High School gym. Like you just mentioned, they would run a high school, and they had a local promoter that lived in Metropolis, Illinois, the home of Superman. And Sean Delaney's new book about Evansville, he's got some cool stuff in there about Paducah and this new. Oh, here we go. Just passed it. Here it is.
And you're talking about Jackson and Paducah being a Thursday town. For many years, Chattanooga was a Thursday town.
Yeah.
Back a little bit older, as it eased into the 70s, they moved more into the Saturday night show and the occasional Sunday show.
But this is probably because they weren't running Jackson. But on June the 19th, 1975, in Paducah, Kentucky, Jackie Fargo and Crazy Luke Graham versus Rocket Monroe and Randy Tyler on top.
Yeah.
So they got the A-Town match in Paducah, probably because Jackson wasn't running. Probably.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention too, and this is kind of hard to figure out at times, maybe it's not for you, but it is for me, is the towns that go back and forth sometimes between Gulas and Lee Fields. And so there's a period of time here where, and Buddy Wayne was the promoter. And so there's times here where the Montgomery matches are listed as Gulas matches. And then there's times where they're listed under Lee Fields. And Selma, Alabama is another town that Buddy Wayne ran. And that goes over. And I was going to ask Michael Norris about this too, but
Michael might have better insight into it than I do, because that's something I've always wondered about too.
It's all family, so I just don't know how that stuff kind of worked. I'd always kind of been curious about that.
It's all family, and family doesn't always get along either.
No.
And I'm not saying that's the situation here, but you wonder.
Yeah.
With some of this.
Well, Tim, is there anything else here about the summer of 75 you wanted to mention or talk about?
Maybe three things I wanted to mention real quick, and I'll keep them real quick.
No, that's fine. We got plenty of time.
Up in Johnson City on July 1, a guy named Ed Wolf lost his leg. He was working a match with Ron Wright against Chris Colt and Mike Boyette. He got thrown from the ring, and his leg speared a wooden chair on the outside of the ring. And I think he would have probably been all right from the accounts I have read and heard through the years. But he had some bad medical attention in the hospital, and gangrene began to set up. They were afraid it was really going to hurt him even worse than what happened. And they ended up amputating his leg. Ed Wolf's not a guy that's very well known in wrestling circles, because he was a part-time wrestler. And he was a full-time policeman in Kingsport. And so he was part of this crew, of this East Tennessee crew. Every territory, Western Kentucky had Buddy Hack, right?
Yeah.
every little nook and cranny of these cities had people who didn't travel far, or who never made it big beyond a certain town or whatever. And Ed Wolf was one of those guys that had worked for probably 12 or 15 years inside the ring, and who only worked part-time. Pretty good talent from what I remember, and it's a shame what happened to him. I do know that he continued to work for the police department after this, and he just passed away a few years ago, and was highly regarded in the community for his work and for his attitude and his can-do ability. Ed Wolf was one of those guys.
And for those of you, if you're not from Western Kentucky, or if you haven't studied this, you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just here to tell you, growing up there, Buddy Hack was over, man. He was over, and he worked at the railroad there in Paducah, and he wrestled. And he'd get on television and he'd do an interview, and he was going to whip the heels, and man, everybody just believed him. He was over.
It was the Whitey Caldwell.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
exactly.
The same principle as what Whitey Caldwell was.
Same thing.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention real quick, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact date on this, but the Chattanooga ring announcer was a man named Norman Vesey, and Norm passed away in July, I believe it was July of 1975. Norm was the ring announcer, and what I remember about him was he was tall, skinny, and he wore a bow tie. And he was not only the ring announcer at the house shows in Chattanooga, he did them on television. This is back when you stuck the ring announcer, in the TV ring, and he made the announcements there.
Yeah, right.
Norm was dabbled in pro wrestling for many years. I think you run into his name some in Alabama, maybe as a front man for Nick Gulas and Roy Welch, maybe around Montgomery at some point in the 50s or 60s. But this is also an example. Norm is an example of taking advantage of what's available to you. And I mean, obviously, Norm had an interest in pro wrestling and being involved in it in some way. But when Nick Gulas began and Roy Welch worked Chattanooga, they got to the point where they hired Harry Thornton and brought Harry Thornton in as a partner. And Harry was your TV host. And Harry had been around forever in Chattanooga media, Chattanooga radio, and then television. So he was recognizable, particularly to a first generation TV viewer and maybe a second generation radio listener.
Yes.
You know, he was somebody that you knew and somebody you trusted. Well, Norm Veazey was a sports hero locally. He grew up in North Georgia, and he became a baseball star for the Chattanooga Lookouts minor league team in the 40s, I believe. And from what I understand, he was a pretty good hitter. And so he parlayed that into being the ring announcer
Oh my
in
goodness.
Chattanooga. So if you were a sports fan of any kind, you knew who Harry Thornton was because Harry called the Lookouts games for a time as a PA announcer. And then you had Norm Veazey, who'd played for them as your ring announcer.
Well, that does my heart good. I'm glad you mentioned Norm Veazey.
I'll send you some info on Norm.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I love that about. That's one of the things I love about this show, and I want this show to recognize these guys, these territory guys that maybe would never ever get mentioned any other time. Like today, in the Facebook group, I always post when people pass away or whatever. Well, I made sure Pat Hutchinson's name was on the list because, I mean, the guy was a carpenter in. You probably, if you've ever watched any Memphis television, you've seen Pat Hutchinson lose 500 matches, but just not a guy that would be normally mentioned. But on the day of his passing, I wanted to make sure he got mentioned.
Absolutely. Let me throw out a few more unsung heroes.
Okay, great.
And I'll be done unless you want to keep talking.
No.
Preparing for a show like this, I've collected a lot of stuff over the years, but a lot of that's not possible without the work of a lot of people from a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so a guy like Scott Teal. Scott began working for Nick Gulas in the summer of 1975.
Mm.
And so it's kind of an anniversary for him as well. And for those, if you don't know who Scott Teal is when it comes to pro wrestling history, look him up, look up Crowbar Press. He's written and co-authored a ton of books and magazines.
You're missing a big puzzle piece if you don't know Scott.
Yes. But more importantly, for what you and I are talking about, Tony, so many of the photos and information that exist from 1975 until the end of the Gulas territory, at least, is chiefly from Scott Teal, from his photography, from his programs. So, a guy like that's invaluable. Mike Shields is another guy who worked for Gulas and Welch, and then for Jerry Jarrett. If you watch some of those clips from the Mid-South Coliseum and from some of the other arenas from the mid-70s, Mike Shields is likely the guy holding the camera.
Probably, yeah.
And
probably the guy that edited it.
And probably the guy that edited it. He worked for many years for Jarrett, then went to work for Vern Gagne.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago, moved back to Nashville. And unfortunately, we've lost him since then. But he was a great guy, great resource, and left behind a legacy that we're able to kind of to back off of right now.
I could be wrong, but I think he and Jerry lived next door to each other for a while, didn't they?
Maybe.
I think Mike Shields lived next door to Jerry Jarrett for a little bit, and they were just working all the time. You know.
And Randy West was another guy who became a photographer, and I believe that's Eddie. He was married into the Eddie Marlin family.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Randy was a photographer as well. And some of those guys, their work still stands today. And also, I'll throw these two in there too, and that's Jim Cornette and Eddie Gilbert. Jim Cornette and Eddie Gilbert, photographers, for some of this late 70s stuff that we'll eventually get to. They, you can look in some of those magazines from the late 70s before they got into the business, and you'll see photos by Eddie Gilbert or photos by Jim Cornette. And one of the other sources, you and I talked about this earlier, I wanted to mention is Tuesday Night at the Garden, Pro Wrestling in Louisville. It's a book by Jim Cornette and Mark James. It's been out for a number of years. The city of Memphis and some of these other cities had a great rapport with newspapers, and so the results were reported in the next day's newspaper or what have you, and more write-ups. Louisville wasn't always that way, but Jim Cornette has documented the shows that he went to in Louisville in this book and some of the TV results. And so we might have the lineups, but then you pair them with the results that Jim Cornette has, and you get a more clear picture, a more broad picture of what's there. And he and Mark James, Mark has written a ton of books on Memphis, is what we call Memphis as well.
Yeah.
There we go. We get back to that.
Jimmy's our age too, so
yeah,
he's just going to the matches and writing stuff in his notebook. Like
Yeah.
he didn't know he was going to be one of the key people to record all this for us all these years later. I mean,
Yes.
just fortunate enough that he kept it all, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad he's a pack rat in that regard.
Yeah. And as you can see, you know, I think our generation, we're all pack rats.
Yes,
you know?
yes, we are.
Yeah. And too, I want to mention too, a guy you just mentioned, and I don't think we talked about him the whole show, but I did want to mention Eddie Marlin's still a big star in this era. I mean, in this year of 75, Eddie Marlin, he's got one of the matches with the Stomper, I think in Evansville or Louisville won.
Yeah.
And so he's still working middle, top of the card here in 75.
And Eddie had been around a long time at this point. I mean, Eddie was not, I don't want to say a young man, but, you know, young man's business, I guess. But Eddie had been around in the 50s working some shows. So, you know, he'd been around a while. Former policeman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And so your vision of him, most people that are watching your vision of him is when he come out on Memphis TV, you know, and maybe not aware of the fact that he used to be, you know, a big tag team champion and a big, highly respected, tough guy.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that's who you trusted to carry your money back. In a lot of towns. You wouldn't want to mess with it. Eddie was a big guy, physically big guy. And, you know, sometimes we come full circle on some of these things. The Dr. Frank mask. I think Eddie worked under a Dr. Frank mask at one point.
I bet
in the late 60s.
I'm sure if there wasn't anybody else, I'm sure Eddie said he'd do it. So,
but, you know, Eddie with a great tag team with Tommy Gilbert helped get Tommy Gilbert over, really.
Yeah. Yep. Well, you had anything else on your list?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe
that's all great. I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned all those people because I have nothing but the highest respect for every name you named there.
Well, you know, they're out there, and that material is out there, and you know, it's so accessible now, and I'm grateful for that and glad for that. But somebody had to do that hard work back then, and fortunately, it's been preserved enough. To where we have it today. And
you go back 30 years, we didn't have that.
Right.
You know, so you know, to me, it's I highly value it. You know.
Yes, I do too.
All right, Tim, thank you so much, man. It's been great. Another great show. We covered the summer. We are up to the fall. There's some great things that are going to happen in the fall. And the way we're going to wind up this 1975 is going to be great. Jerry Lawler's going to come back. And we got a lot of great things to still talk about next time we get together. So thank you so much, man.
Yes, sir. Glad to do it.
All right, Tim Deals, everybody. And hang on. We'll be back with more of the Time Tunnel right after this. I hope you enjoyed our show today. We had a great interview with Kurt Nielsen on his brand new biography book on the life and career of the Plowboy, Stan Frazier. Big Stan. And also Tim Deals came by the Richards Ranch tonight, and we had a great conversation about the summer of 1975 in my home wrestling territory that I grew up with, the Tennessee territory. Great towns like Nashville and Memphis and even my hometown of Paducah, Kentucky. They just started running that again in the summer of 75. And so great stuff about the Jackson Coliseum and about it having to be repaired and reestablished and rebuilt. And so thanks to Tim Deals for bringing so much historical knowledge to our program here. Next week, we're going to go north. We're going to the Great White North. We're going to Canadian wrestling, and we're going to be talking about the territory of Toronto. And to help me take a tour of the Toronto territory in 1975 will be my historian friend and Canadian analyst, Wes Maidment. And Wes is going to be here to take us through Toronto. And then we're going to Calgary, Alberta, to Stampede Wrestling, the great territory that was run by Stu Hart and the Hart family for so many years. And one of their top babyface stars in 1975 was Red Dog Larry Lane. And I've become very good friends with Larry and his wife, Gwen. And I had a nice conversation with Larry. We walked through the first part of 1975 in his career, his program with King Curtis Iakea, the tag team championship run that he had there and the various partners that he had, the different towns that he went to in the Stampede territory. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with Larry Lane and our trip through Stampede in 1975. That's coming up on next week's show. Once again, come by my Substack channel. It's Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. We're looking into getting our domain pointed over there. The ProWrestlingTimeTunnel.com will be pointed over in that direction. So that's all you have to put in, and you'll go right to my website at Substack. And so that'll make it a whole lot easier and a lot simpler for everybody. Another project we're working on is we're working on wider and more thorough distribution of our podcast. Very soon, it's going to be available everywhere you get podcasts. And so we're only up to our 17th episode. So we won't have a whole lot of archived episodes that we'll have to upload. And then every week when we come out with a new episode, it will be in wide distribution so everybody can tune in and enjoy our conversation every single week. We got some great guests coming up. We have all our usual cast of historians and analysts also. But if you want to know what we've got coming up on the show, if you go over to my Substack site, Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com, there's a tab that says Current Projects. You can see where I am on the books that I'm writing. You can see the shows that we have in production. You can see the podcasts that we have in the planning stages. And so I'm really working hard to try to keep that Current Project tab updated. So all the podcast shows that I'm going to be doing guest appearances on, all of that stuff is going to be available right there on that one page on my website at Substack.com. So if you want to know what I'm up to and what I've got going on, you can go over there and check it out. Okay? Thanks a lot for joining us. I so appreciate the feedback that I get every single week on the shows that we do. I appreciate your investment of time and your interest. And thank you so much for being here with us once again at the Richards Ranch at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. And we'll be back with another great show. We're going to Canada here next week on the Time Tunnel. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.